All right, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here, man. Thank you for inviting me on. I gotta warn you, AI is still a scary topic for me, so I might not be the most knowledgeable, but I like the name of the podcast, AI for anyone. So
No worries. I think a lot of folks have that attitude towards artificial intelligence being a very sort of pie in the sky, very complex, like difficult to talk about topic. But, as we talk about it, I think you're going to sort of settle into a more comfortable rhythm because it does affect every single sort of aspect of our lives. And so it's a lot of conversations around AI aren't around the technology itself, but around the impact it has on society. But before we get started with that, I would love for you to just go over and talk a little bit about yourself, your background, just in your own words.
Yeah, I'm traditionally a tech entrepreneur. I've been a tech entrepreneur for over 10 years in the tech industry, building apps for video games, building, different kind of conferences for tech, people in tech that come speak to underrepresented audiences. And I've been doing that for so long. And so when I got the opportunity about a few years ago, like about 2-3 years ago, I was invited to be the entrepreneur in residence of Newark Venture Partners, which is a VC firm based in Newark, New Jersey, that was started by the CEO of Audible. And so I took that opportunity because I was originally from Newark. I was born and raised, and so, this is like a good way to kind of come back and, kind of be a part of the change that's happening to, a large city that has been largely ignored and kind of, swept under the radar for so long. So I saw it as a great opportunity. And over the course of the 2 years, I just kind of fell in love with storytelling, being downstairs from Audible, that's what will happen to you. So, and podcasts were becoming super, super interesting again. And I knew a little bit about audio because my brother was a producer. I said, you know what? The stars are kind of aligning here. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and start this new storytelling company, and that's where ABF Creative was born, because as we were starting to see this rise in podcasts and audio, I started to notice that, certain individuals, certain voices were missing from the conversation. And I just thought that why not jump in and make, multicultural voices part of this new wave of audio content, and we were still at the ground floor. When we think about industries, like television and radio and all these different industries, these are behemoth industries now. Podcasts are just now cracking the $1 billion, dollar advertising, rate. So for me, it was just like, all right, I love it. I love storytelling. There's a lot of potential for growth here. Let's throw my hat in the ring and see if we can innovate in some way.
Well, that's amazing. I love the fact that you're giving back to a community that has given a lot to you from your earlier days as well. And I definitely want to dig into your background and what inspired you ultimately to found ABF Creative later on in the podcast. But while we're on the topic of ABF Creative, now on your website, you mentioned that you use artificial intelligence in your business. So how do you use AI to enable this creative venture that you're working on?
So at ABF Creative, we have a proprietary production framework that we created in-house called the Storytime Framework. And what the Storytime Framework allows us to do is to be smarter at producing, be smarter at, choices that we make in the production process. And so one of those things that we do is we utilize a very popular, amongst marketers, a very popular backend called Veritonic. Veritonic allows us to kind of analyze and test certain voices, certain music against the potential audience that we want to, broadcast this stuff to. But it's using machine learning to do so, and it gets smarter and smarter every time you use it. And so that's one of the ways that we utilize that. And the reason why it's such a blessing to us is because, it saves you time and money. We can find out fairly quickly if this is something that our audience will, feel happy about, will they be engaged with? Would they, does it give off angry vibes? Does it increase purchase intent? These are usually things that marketers use to create ads, but we're flipping it on its head and using this to create content, full-fledged content. Another way that we use, and it's not necessarily so much AI, but we also, we balance that with actual focus group testing. And so we're able to kind of see the comparisons between what the machine gives us and then what humans give us. Sometimes we test the same things and sometimes we test different things. But overall, what this process does is it helps us make smarter content. We don't waste a lot of time asking questions or using our hunches. There's a little bit of hunch involved in art, but what we want to do is just at least just make smarter decisions. That's all. We just want to be smarter at creating content. And for our audience that's very particular about what they listen to and what they identify, like what they consume is what they identify with. It's not just, multicultural audiences just don't consume content to say, hey, I'm being entertained today and then I'm going to turn it off. No, they really closely identify is who they are, what the content that they consume is embedded in their identity. And so we want to make sure that we're being very careful about that. So
that's incredible. And what sort of data points that you're able to disclose are incorporated into that decision making or that the algorithm that you use in the proprietary production framework?
I can't dig too deep, but what I will say is, like, for us is really the biggest thing for us is the voices. For us, we really want to make sure that person that we have behind the mic is someone who's going to resonate with this audience the most. And that to me was probably the most important, I would say, thing that we measure. And it's, I'll give a good example. We have a podcast called African Folktales, which is a storytelling podcast for, children. And one of the assumptions that we made was that, hey, let's go get an older woman, almost grandma-like, to kind of sit around the fire and tell stories kind of vibe. And that wasn't at all working. We test multiple, voices. And the one that, tested the best was kind of like not even like a mid-30, late 30, woman, and just kind of like, with an accent, who was telling these African stories. And at first we were like, oh, I don't know if it's going to work, but it sounds good. So we put it out, and now the podcast averages about 100,000 downloads a month. And so,
wow.
For us, that kind of just said, okay, yeah, we might have something here. Let's figure this out. Let's dig deeper. Of course, results may vary. So I'm not, I'm not saying everything we push, but what was so special about that? We're trying to replicate that, success, and it takes more testing to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this sounds like a wonderful idea, and it sounds like you're very forward thinking in this industry, because a lot of folks do rely on hunch. And I'm curious, where did you draw inspiration from when you came up with this idea? I do know that there are certain media companies out there. The one that comes to mind for me is Netflix, that are extremely data driven, and they leverage a lot of consumer data and other varieties of data in order to make decisions on what type of content to create. I'm curious, what inspired you? Was it a Netflix type company, or was it something else?
It was something else. When I met with, so the company that we're partners with is Veritonic. When I met with the CEO and the founder of Veritonic, I believed in everything that they were preaching about. Like, it was just like, man, this makes so much sense. Like, when it comes to audio, people should be really utilizing it for content, not just for ads, but it was mainly used for marketers. Marketers found the most value in it, for the most part. And it wasn't necessarily Netflix that inspired me, but, data just kept getting, just to me, data was a new oil, and there's a woman named Angela Benton, who was a very, influential person early in my career, who started a company called Streamlytics. And she would be someone who would just constantly beat the drum of data and how important data was, especially for communities of color, to have some ownership and control over their data. And this is a drum she beat just constantly. You know, if you go to her channel, Angela Benton on Twitter, Instagram, you will see she would be posting or interviewing and just talking a lot about it. And so to me, I think it was just more so stars aligning, where, hey, you know, I know this person and they're doing some great work, and I'm increasingly getting educated about the importance of data-driven, you know, media companies from someone like her. And so I just say, you know what? Let's find a smarter way to produce content. The other reason that sort of Storytime framework, the framework we developed, didn't have any data-driven elements to it. We developed the framework simply because we found a way to make, you know, very expensive sounds very quickly and very resourcefully. So, and then we said, okay, now that we know how to make things quicker and cheaper, let's make it smarter. And so that's where the AI and, you know, and the focus group testing was into the conversation.
Awesome. And so use artificial intelligence when it comes to figuring out what type of content to deliver to your consumers. Is any artificial intelligence used in the relationship you have with advertisers? Because I'm assuming you have advertisers facilitating a revenue stream, but is there any AI used in that relationship at all? Not yet.
You know, I mean, now that we have access to this, I mean, to us, you know, it makes sense to start, you know, utilizing that with those relationships, but we haven't done anything on that level yet. We're still refining our process and still getting smarter. You know, machine learning is the reason why it's called that. And so it's, you know, the thing about AI and the thing about these systems is a lot of them aren't necessarily built with a lot of feedback from communities of color. And so, you know, what we're looking forward to is like, how do we make a smarter system to make better decisions for the kind of content that we're creating? And so we're focused on that and getting some studies behind that going. And then, you know, I think once we feel like we have something very smart on our hands, you know, of course, we're doing this in partnership with Veritonic. Once we feel that way, I think that's when we can start to apply that to, you know, other areas.
So obviously this is working really well for you. I know that you won a Webby Award last year. So can you talk this year? Awesome. Can you talk on that?
This year. African Folktales. That was that podcast won a Webby Award. So you know, AI won us a Webby Award. So it's very interesting to get that. It was one of those things where we just felt really good, man. You know, when you've been doing something like this for such a long time, to get some kind of recognition, it always feels good. So what we're looking to do is figure out ways we can, you know, triple and double down on that success even further. But we're really happy, and I wish I could take the credit all to myself, but I can't. You know, we have a really great, wonderful production team, very talented team of people who work with me, who have done just such an amazing job on this podcast and many others.
That's amazing, Anthony. And, you know, one part of this podcast is to talk about artificial intelligence. That's what our nonprofit does. And the other part is also learning about what it takes to become successful in a very rapidly changing world. And that's one thing that you've definitely demonstrated. I mean, the fact that you're incorporating algorithms into an industry that traditionally relies very heavily on hunches is very forward thinking. And I'm curious in learning about where your entrepreneurial itch started, or how that journey started, because I know you've started several companies in the past. And so I want to sort of open the floor for you to talk a little bit about those experiences and what the motivation was behind this entrepreneurial drive that's ultimately driven you to founding ABF Creative.
Yeah. Uh, man, I think it's really just, always been on a quest for freedom. For me, it's all about, I just want to be financially free. I want to be creatively free. I want to be mentally free, just free, and creating wonderful things that people enjoyed has always brought a sense of like satisfaction in me that just I couldn't find anywhere else. And so for me, creating just was that outlet of freedom for me. I just went straight forward with it. I love video game. My first startup was a company called Playd, Playd. And it was like Foursquare for video games. I love video games. Like I always loved to always had a dream of just making money and making a living, making a life out of doing the things I love. And that desire, that's what drove me. That desire is what drove me to do all these different things, to start all of these different companies. That was the deciding factor. And what keeps me going, because it definitely hasn't been easy, and especially being a person of color in the tech industry and all those different things. Like to me, it was just what kept me going, is just knowing that I just knew I deserved it. Like I just knew I had I just felt like the universe was always on my side. Like there was a bigger force behind me at all times. And that's what really kept me going, and kept me persevering despite the odds, despite the hurdles, despite the co-founder breakups, despite the lack of resources, the lack of money, despite the lack of time, so those are the things that just, always get in the way, but, just perseverance. And then as far as like, what fuels that creativity is, I have a quote that I always use, which is, you don't reinvent the wheel, put rims on it. And I just thought about, I thought about that when I was just in a car one day and, just looking at a big, a Yukon, GNC Yukon truck with just big, massive rims. And I don't know, the thought just came to me and I was like, wow, that's sort of like what the industry is. Like, I'm not doing it. Like making podcasts isn't new. Using AI isn't new. Using machine learning isn't. What I'm doing is I'm just putting my twist on it. I'm just putting my spin on this thing. And you can apply that to almost any industry. You want to write a book, you want to create an app, do them in industries that have already have proven to have audiences or have customers. You could still innovate. The innovation is not in the base of what you do. It's in your spin on it. That's when the innovation comes in. And so I think sometimes when people think about innovating, they're thinking about, oh, this thing has to be this complete new thing that nobody has ever seen before. Nobody has ever done. Nobody has ever, even thought about. But that's not true. Innovation is a unique spin on something that's existed already. So that's what I was like, I feel like I got a whole bunch of unique spins on lots of things. And that's what I want to do.
That's awesome. And that's very, very true. I mean, a lot of folks may think that innovation is completely reinventing the wheel, just completely just out of thin air, coming up with an idea that nobody's ever thought of before, something mutually exclusive from everything that's ever existed. But very often, a lot of the biggest ideas that are started are just derivatives of other ideas. They're incremental improvements, and they sort of take on a life of their own. And I think folks that have a bias towards action, like yourself, being an entrepreneur, being somebody that knows what it takes to hustle and to build, I think folks recognize that. It's not going to be a miraculous moment when you just have the perfect idea that nobody's ever thought of before. It's normally just kind of following the leads that other people are taking, deriving ideas from ideas that are proven to be successful, and running with those.
Right.
So I know giving back is a big part of your life as well. And so in multiple stages of your career, you've chosen to pursue opportunities that allow you to give back, such as the, I believe it's called a New Work Venture Fund. was one of them. Can you talk about what the inspiration is behind giving back and why that's so important to you?
I think it's just really about, I always remember being a kid in Newark and literally having no one I can call on to help me get my ideas out, or not having a community I could be a part of where I could meet people who could help me get my ideas out, or having a community that had education where I could be taught how to get my ideas out. I just lacked that as a kid. Like, everything came through the internet. I had to go and Google and watch Mixergy.com 10 hours a day, and watch a whole bunch of YouTube videos and read a bunch of articles, which, everybody should do. But community, there's a community of people who come from where I come from who may not have that access, who may not know what to Google. A lot of people think, just Google it. Well, what do I type in Google? Google isn't as simple as people think. Like, you got to know what question to ask Google in order to find what you want.
Yeah, you have to have known unknowns rather than the unknown unknowns, the things that you don't even know you don't know.
Right. And so inherently, I've always been a super curious person. So I've always found a way to get to the answer of what I wanted to know. That was just me. But there are a lot of people who just aren't as naturally curious as I am. But that doesn't necessarily make them less capable of being successful. And so you have to surround those individuals with community. And that's always what I try to do, is just try to make sure I just, gave back in a way where people found the answer they were looking for. That's all. I always just wanted to put people in a position to win. It's, for me, my community, that's always been a really big thing that I've always tried to do.
Amazing. Giving folks opportunities is always very fulfilling, and really amazing to see all of the projects that you've started and you've worked on to give back to the Newark community. And Anthony, what I wanted to ask you is, what would you say to students or folks that are interested in learning about artificial intelligence or data, about the importance that these topics have on the future of business and the opportunities that they present?
Yeah, I mean, that's, to me, I'll answer that with two different answers. The first one is, if you want to learn more and about this industry, I think it's just immersion, total immersion. I think sometimes when people want to learn about a certain thing, they think they got to go get every library book known to man about this topic, but that's not always the best way to learn. For me, it's immersion. Immersion means, let me go download podcasts like these. You already did step one. Find some others. This podcast, what are some others? What are some audiobooks you can consume? What are some YouTube channels that might be pretty interesting? What are some AI movies you might want to look at, or documentaries? I just think total immersion into the topic. Learning comes naturally and organically from that too. So you'll start to pick up on certain keywords, trends, some certain topics, certain theories. And then it makes the actual learning a lot easier, because now when you're already totally immersed in it as something you're just genuinely interested in, when you actually sit down to learn the technicalities of what this is, then you're good to go. The other thing is, I had the cheat code. I partner with a company that they did all of that, and so sometimes it's about leveraging, maybe finding, someone who a person or a company that's already did a lot of that immersion, a lot of that hard work, and are super geeked out about this topic, and let them teach you or let them help you, get to what your goal is with AI or machine learning, et cetera. The other thing is that, data and AI, like we have to, like I mentioned earlier, it requires training. It requires input, from humans. And we want to make sure that that future that's AI driven is inclusive. And I just think that's super important for me. And I think the work that we're doing with Veritonic is going to be really, really important in a few years. Not right now, maybe, but like in a few years, like you're like, okay, we'll be able to look back and say, I'm glad we did that, because, you know, it's only going to get smart off of what it's given. And we don't want to have certain communities, certain races, certain backgrounds and cultures excluded from the process, because then that is the data really that I'm receiving really accurate? Is it really painting, you know, a reality of what this world is? And that's always going to reflect the people who are programming it. And so, you know, that's something else I wanted to definitely put out there. But yeah, so glad you decided to ask me that question.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's great advice, and I really appreciate that, Anthony. And I think that's a really good place to close as well. And before we close, I want to open the floor to you to talk about anything on your personal level or ABF Creative's working on that you want to share with our audience.
Yeah, I want to definitely share that we just released a brand new Audible original called Raising the Game, The Untold Story of Jerry Lawson. And Jerry Lawson, you have a pretty, you know, technical audience who are interested in technical side of tech. Jerry Lawson was an engineer who helped, you know, create the first console, you know, cartridge-based video game console. And a lot of people don't know him because he's an actual Black engineer from Queens, New York, with no college degree whatsoever. This guy flew to Silicon Valley and became the chief, you know, became the head of the video game division of a very popular semiconductor company called Fairchild. He led the team that created the Channel F video game console. This guy was responsible for the pause button on our controllers today. He's responsible for cartridges being used commercially today. He also was part of the computer club with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak back in the Apple days. But this guy is almost 6'6", 320 pounds, was Black and had an afro. But yet he went missing from history. Why is that? And that's what we're trying to figure out. Like, how did a guy that was so impactful, and it's not like nobody knows him. Like on the podcast, we spoke to Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, the co-founders of Chuck E. Cheese, the creator of Pong, the Pong video game everyone loves and everybody knows about. So this isn't a guy that people didn't know about, at least from that time. But why did history forget him? And so that's the part where we want to right those wrongs.
That sounds awesome. I'm definitely going to take a listen, and we're going to include all of the details in the show description on how you can listen to that, and also more information on Anthony as well as ABF Creative. And I think that's a good place to close there. Anthony, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you, man. I appreciate the questions and the energy that you brought, man. This is amazing.
My pleasure.